What we want to do when we're representing a seller is we're trying to describe the unique characteristics of a company. If you think about it as an asset, what's unique about it? What's unique about the tech? Do they have a moat? Do they have a technological moat? Do they have a 2-year lead ahead of somebody? We try and really understand that, and we try and communicate that along with, hey, here's the tech stack that we're using, and try and describe the data flows and things like that, so that people will not only understand, okay, what's unique about it, but how it works. And we think that's important because it needs to work on the acquirer's platform. So now, unless they want to keep it as a standalone, and keeping it as a standalone can be really, really expensive. Here's an example of one that didn't work. We helped a company acquire another business, and part of the deal, we just bought the assets. The acquiring company, who I was representing, didn't bring on any of the people. So when they started to spin up the product, and it came with a bunch of customers, and what they found was that, first of all, there were a bunch of customers who were already pissed off about how the thing was functioning, and they had not disclosed that to us. But also, our guys were on Azure, they were on AWS. Now you're running 2 different environments, and that's incredibly expensive. And then when stuff started breaking, didn't have access to the people to come and fix it. So that was a really tough situation. You try and raise these issues, you try and identify them early, you try and identify them during due diligence. There were other reasons why they decided to ignore red flags and pursue it anyways, but you try and do this early, and it's really helpful. So that's one of the reasons why you got to bring in really good advisors, not just financial advisors. It's important to bring in somebody who can come in and evaluate, what am I acquiring? Or if you're on the sell side, what am I acquiring? But also, if you're a seller, you want them to be evaluating your tech and making sure that all fits and that there's a path to integrate it, because if it doesn't work, you may have an earnout tied to that. And if it doesn't work, you're not getting your earnout. So before you sign that deal, you want to understand, we've not yet signed the deal. Maybe we're under a letter of intent, but you're going to have an integration plan related to headcount. What's our integration plan related to the tech? That's equally as important, because if it doesn't work, that's worse than having a headcount person slotted in the wrong spot. It's significantly worse. And then the other thing that we look at is tech debt.
Right.
So we're representing a company that's either trying to raise money or trying to sell themselves. And it's 2024, and they built their platform in 2012. So you've got systems that are old, that are held together by duct tape, and they just haven't invested in modernizing the tech stack. And you see that all the time because it's expensive to modernize a tech stack. And so what are the implications of that? Well, the implications of that are, when a buyer starts to do the work on, okay, how are we going to integrate these companies? What becomes relatively apparent pretty quickly is it's going to cost a lot of money to update that tech stack such that it can integrate within hours. So that becomes very expensive. If that company is looking to raise money, a savvy investor out there is looking to understand your tech stack and what sort of tech debt may be there. And that goes into their valuation calculation. If it's going to cost $10 million to upgrade the tech stack, they're going to be responsible for that. Right? They stroke that check. But guess who's going to pay for it? You are, Mr. Seller, or the guy who's taking an investment. So people look at it and they quantify what is needed to bring this up to date. And if you haven't done a good job, and again, you're the company that's thinking about raising money or selling, if you haven't done a good job of maintaining your tech stack, it will be very expensive. And the longer you wait, the more expensive it'll be.
Right. We call this whole thing the hidden chasm because a lot of times it's a surprise. So
it is very much a surprise.
It shouldn't be a surprise.
It shouldn't be a surprise, but it's often a surprise. This is why it's important to have good advisors who can think about this stuff. But people need to be focused in on the blocking and tackling of putting companies together. Very often, you've got a deal advocate on one side and a seller on the other side. who thinks about 1 + 1 = 5, and the strategic rationale is really great. And there's a tremendous market TAM that we can go after together, and it's going to be awesome. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing this deal. We have every reason to do this deal. But they think up here.
Yeah.
When Leg got bought by Stifel, which I think I missed in part of my bio, was I was at Leg for 5 years. Stifel acquired it in 2005, and I left in 2010. But anyway, when Stifel acquired Leg Mason Wood Walker, the capital markets group, they didn't announce it until it was done. So we had no idea. And then I got an org chart. They sent out a group org chart after it closed, and they had people in the wrong group. So deals close without people actually thinking about, okay, where do people go? Where does tech go? And it happens all the time. It's not often. It's probably 50-50 where do you have somebody actually really leaning in on the integration piece during the LOI period. And if you don't, it becomes really, really challenging. And deals happen all the time where they don't.
I always joke on paper, it sounds great to buy 15 houses and make an apartment building. In reality, that could be kind of hard.
I've heard several things. You said the word synergies. And I'm thinking you talked about the synergy of value early on, understand like what's the actual value to the user base on the buyer side or the customer base on the buyer side of this product gap. And then the technical integration side. All right. Mm-hmm. Even after that's validated, if there's no way to integrate it in from a technical side, then it's...
Yeah. So if your thesis is that we've got a product and we can add a new product into our bundle and everything's going to work together seamlessly, if that's your thesis and it turns out that this piece doesn't talk to this piece, then it's hard to execute on that. And so you end up running things in parallel so that this great theory that you had that we can sell you one platform and you'll have one throat to choke. Well, if the stuff doesn't talk or work together or integrate, even at the product level, never mind the back end level, your whole thesis is out the window because I still need to have this and I still need to have this.
Then you talked about the third component. So like even if you got those two correct, I'll say the word, the agility or the velocity with which you can pivot and adjust and shift is dependent upon the size of the legacy or the tech debt. So you can get those two taken care of, but then if you've got a huge burden in the technical debt or the legacy tech, whatever you learn needs to adjust based on the integration and the value. In order to achieve that value is going to depend upon that third piece. Is that accurate to say?
Yes.
What I really liked is the point you made that it's a little easier to talk about this problem from a buyer perspective because you have to build the machine. But you made the point that it's also very, very important from a seller perspective, not so much because you're trying to build all these integrations, but because you need to be easy to integrate with, because it's not like you can't just assume as founder that you're going to build this thing, get a check and walk away and everything's fine. There's going to be real financial repercussions if it doesn't work.
That's exactly right. And part of it is being really thoughtful about how you put the components of the tech stack together. Part of it is being thoughtful about, are you using open source? And if you're using open source, are you building with the right licensing? Are you doing a really good job of documenting and maintaining your tech stack and your code base? We did a deal where we sold a company called Petris. It was an oil and gas data management business, and we sold them to Halliburton. And they ran a code scan, black duck scan, on Petris, the seller. And that tech was cobbled together over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so they found all these licensing issues, and what it did is it delayed the process because now they've identified a page full of things that we need to mitigate. So we've got to go through and mitigate all this stuff. And some of it was pushing out new code to all of your companies. But the problem was a lot of them were not on the cloud. So it was on-prem. Now you've got to push out new versions to on-prem customers. And how do you do that? That process cost us 2 months because we didn't know it was in the code.